Hello everyone, how are you guys doing? Hopefully you're having a wonderful day. Today we're here with a video on the best soccer cards to invest in at this current moment. Now this isn't a video that I've really ever done, and it won't be exactly the video that you probably expect it to be, so that's why I am doing this video. This is a question that I got actually pretty recently on a video, and a general type of video that I feel a lot of people would like to see and would like to click on, and so for that reason, I'll give the people what they want. We can talk about it, and I'll give my thoughts on what I think the best soccer card investments are. So let's go ahead and talk about those today. So, of course, as always, to start, we begin with the disclaimer. The first one being this is collecting advice, not investing advice. As we'll come to see, I won't be giving you necessarily cards to go out and buy and that you're going to make stonks on, because that's not the point of this. I mean, in theory, it should be, but that's not what I'm going to give you today. I'm going to give you what you need, not what you want. This is one man's experience and one man's thoughts on the hobby, the soccer space in general. Of course, this varies person to person. So go out, make some friends, ask some friends, get other people's opinions as well. My channel should be something that you can bounce ideas off of, not a place to go to and, take as gospel, because I don't certainly want to be that. And beyond that, the hobby is best learned through experience, so go try it out. So to start, best return on investment cards, but I already sort of hinted at, what's going to be the best return on investment? What are the best cards to buy? And that question in and of itself is just so incredibly difficult. One, because, there's so many soccer cards. There's a ridiculous amount of soccer cards and stickers out there. Even in one player's catalog, there's almost an infinite amount to choose from. So when you throw out the whole space and ask me what's the best investment, it's basically impossible to figure out what that one card is. I can tell you what some of the most iconic cards are. I can tell you what some of the cards that people really like at this moment are. I can tell you what some of the biggest sets are, and I have a lot of those types of videos on my channel, so feel free to check them out. But in terms of which one's going to return the best return on investment, that's practically impossible to answer. And to be fair, even if I did answer it and I told you guys this is going to be the best one, it would be, well, one, somewhat self-fulfilling because people theoretically would go out and buy it. But two, if people go out and buy a card and that card is solely bought for the focus of selling later, and a lot of people do that, then it's not going to be organic, and it's really not going to be the best investment because people are going to want to sell it. Typically, the best performing cards are the ones that people don't want to sell, and so we'll talk more about that as we go. A great example on why it's basically impossible to predict what the best investment's going to be, because this example here, if you would have asked, anyone in the sports card space 2015, 2016, 2017, less than 10 years ago, what the best return on investment cards were going to be, I don't know if people would have necessarily said Mickey Mantle because it's just like a staple of baseball vintage, but they probably would have said that that's a great place to put your money. Meanwhile, if you look at these charts here, on the left-hand side, the Mickey Mantle from 2020 until now, sort of during the booming days, has gone up a little under 3x. Meanwhile, the Messi has gone up, somewhere between 20 and 40x over that same time frame. So a lot of people within the space, I think most everyone, would not have predicted Messi. They would have predicted some more, sustainable, predictable type of player or card, and they would have been wrong because, something like Messi probably outperformed almost everyone during that same time frame. So again, you're never really going to know. You can have strong feelings one way or the other, but through time, we'll see if that plays out. And this is just an example that, again, practically impossible to know, especially, this is just on a 5-year time frame. Imagine if you start talking 10, 15, 20. Now, personally, myself, I think that soccer is a good place to be. I think that the demographics favor soccer. I think that the overall supply-demand type of thing favors soccer because a lot of soccer is regional country releases for potentially worldwide demand. Something that comes to mind for me is, Portugal Ronaldo releases. It's a relatively small country. Ronaldo's an icon across the world. The scales favor decent performance, I would think. Comparatively to, say, something like, baseball in America, where it's mostly an American sport and it was made and produced for an American audience, so the scales are relatively even, you would think. All to say, I think soccer's a good space. I think if you're looking at it from an investment standpoint, I could see why you'd like it. And if you're looking at it from a collecting standpoint, I could see why you'd like it, because honestly, a lot of soccer is pretty cheap relative to a lot of other sports, and you can still buy some of the best players all time for relatively affordable prices, again, compared to a lot of American sports. So I will give you some general advice on how I think about cards and where I would like to put some of my money in terms of cards going forward. Again, a lot of this isn't necessarily investment, it's a lot more collecting, but sometimes those can go a little bit hand in hand because some of the best cards to collect are sometimes the best investments as well. It's not necessarily always true, but sometimes it does play out that way. So we'll start by talking about what not to do, and for this example here, I have a list of the Golden Boy winners over the last 2 decades or so. You can go through the list, read them yourself, you'll notice some names in there, you'll probably laugh at some of the other names in there because they're not all that relevant anymore. In terms of hobby collectability, and if we're looking at it through the lens of proven players that basically have their entire career mapped out, the only one in here that I would say is clearly a winner is obviously Lionel Messi in 2005. Beyond that, the next 2 I would say are probably Wayne Rooney in 2004 and Sergio Aguero in 2007. I would say that those are probably the best performers or the most collectible players from this list of proven players. But even then, man, I mean, for me, whenever I got into soccer, I would have imagined Wayne Rooney was a lot more collectible. I would have thought people were all over him. I mean, one of the most important Manchester United players over the last few decades. I would have thought he was the talk of the town. Turns out, I mean, basically no one cares. I'm sure there's, Manchester United collectors out there. I'm sure there's English collectors out there that definitely collect them. Don't get me wrong, but I don't really see a lot of Instagram profiles or people in Discords talking about Wayne Rooney a lot. And, to me, that's relatively surprising. Same goes for Sergio Aguero. I think even more so, even less talked about. And Messi's really the only winner there. Now, of course, as you get more towards modern day, there's a lot of names that are fairly notable. Obviously, Kylian Mbappe's one, Erling Haaland's another. There's a few names in there that you can see have already basically fallen off or aren't really collectible. And the closer you get to modern day, the more prevalent they are because we haven't seen how their career plays out and ultimately where their collectability lands. Given that these are the Golden Boy winners, you can only imagine what some of the 2nd, 3rd, 4th places probably look like, and they're probably not much more collectible than what we're seeing here. In regard to some of the more recent players, we'll go ahead and look at their card ladder indexes. Now, keep in mind, these indexes aren't perfect. They like to track a lot more of the more frequently traded cards, so you're not going to be tracking one-of-ones and how some of the best cards are performing. Those might be performing better, but generally speaking, they will give a good indicator. So here with Kylian Mbappe, definitely tells a story of where the hobby's been and how it sort of progressed. But if we look at his cards in 2020 to 2022, obviously huge boom and then sort of a decline. A lot of these cards are going to be subject to the general trends of the space as a whole, at least especially for Mbappe since he was around earlier. All to say that you can clearly see that during his career, 4 or 5 years in, people were a lot more excited about his cards generally than they are now. Why? Well, 1, people were spending a lot more during that COVID hype. But 2, there's a lot more anticipation of what could be when he hasn't yet failed to succeed, whatever those, immense expectations were. I would imagine a lot of the people buying in 2020, 2021, 2022 probably would have thought he has a Ballon d'Or by now, probably would have thought he has a Champions League win by now. He has neither of those. Of course, he's done well at the World Cup. I mean, he won the 2018 one, but everyone that was buying these cards knew that, I would like to think. In 2022, he did great. I mean, he's going to go down as one of the best World Cup performers of all time, if not the best, I would say, especially in terms of individual standpoint. But ultimately, his cards haven't really lived up to the hype that we were seeing back there, and they've fallen down a good bit. Now, where will the cards go from here? That's a good question, and obviously his career trajectory will play a big part in that. But all to say that the hype was a lot more amplified earlier in his career and sort of faded as he didn't achieve the highs that people were hoping. And to be fair, a lot of people are hoping for really big highs nowadays because you're comparing to Messi and Ronaldo, 2 of the best players of all time. And so there's some high standards on these guys. Jude's index over the last few years is down nearly 40%, with a little bump in there whenever he got his move to Madrid and, did good things with Madrid, but ultimately his collectability has waned a little bit on these types of cards that they're tracking. Again, not to say that, some really good cards aren't doing well, but generally speaking, it hasn't been the best. And, Where will it go again? Like Mbappe, it's going to depend on what he does, of course. But not all of these guys can win, and that's sort of the point. Haaland, much the same, as you can see a huge boom in 2021, but since then, not a whole lot. And honestly, Erling Haaland's probably lived up to the hype as much as almost anyone, in the sense that he does have a Champions League win. He does have some Premier League wins. He did win a treble. He did break the Premier League goal scoring record, and no one seems to care. I mean, generally speaking, it's not really a big thing. Now, granted, Man City isn't the most collectible team in the space, but you would think that someone like a Haaland and the things that he did might be able to transcend that team collecting nature into an almost sort of star collecting nature. But no Ballon d'Or win, although, me personally, I think he was probably robbed of one. But nonetheless, Messi going to do his thing. All to say that these cards haven't performed all too well either, and another example here, a lot worse of an example than some of the others, is a Pedri. Pedri's been playing really good as of late, but again, the general hobby doesn't seem to care much, especially compared to how much they cared a few years ago when he was coming onto the scene. So, what causes this? What is happening here? Let's talk about it. So first off, I mean, clearly these are unproven players with a lot of buzz, right? So that's the first thing that's really, sort of causing these declines. A lot of people with high expectations are putting those expectations onto these players, and when they don't meet the, multi-Ballon d'Or category, they sort of get tossed to the side and people forget, or at least, for the time being. Maybe they come back later, who knows? Next, the supply of products continue to surge for relatively similar cards. Of course, they have rookie cards, and you can claim that the rookie cards are entirely different, but there's always going to be some sort of competition between rookie cards, second, third, fourth year, yada yada, because there's a lot of parallels. They all look generally the same, and in addition to that, you have autos that generally look the same. Like, you can produce a lot of the same types of cards year after year after year. So not only do you need that initial collectability hype to sort of be there, but you also need that to sustain for year after year after year. And when a player isn't living up to the, extraordinary standards, the collectability and the amount of people willing to buy year after year after year also wanes, and you start to see what we saw over there in those graphs. In addition to that, you also have people who want to sell. I mean, typically when people are buying these rookies, they're doing so from a prospecting standpoint where you're trying to buy early on and maybe sell once they do a few things and make some money off of it. So not only do you have the supply from the manufacturer, but you also have the supply from the people within the space that don't really necessarily want to own the cards. They want to use the cards as a vehicle to make a little money on something else. And then finally, a lack of understanding as to what cards of this player truly matter. Again, as the product supply sort of surges, a lot of people then are sort of at a loss in terms of which cards they should exactly go after and which cards matter the most to that player. Now, with more time in the space, you should be a little better at deciphering that, but at the same time, when the community as a whole finds it difficult to be able to do that, you are going to struggle as well. So now that we have gone through what not to do and what has sort of faltered and caused a lot of people to maybe lose money in the space, how can we reverse this into what you can do to potentially be on the opposite end of this and actually buy cards that might succeed over the long term? So very basic. First one, buy proven players. I think that is just going to be your easiest way of knowing what you're going to get whenever you buy a card, and to be able to know what people are going to think of a player as time goes on, right? If you're buying Messi or Ronaldo, you know exactly what you're going to get. If you're buying a substar like a Neymar, a Modric, an Iniesta, a Xavi, you know exactly what you're going to get. Tons of other players I can throw in those categories, but again, buying proven players is going to be the first and foremost recommendation of mine, because there's no guessing. There's no guessing that's taking place. You know exactly what you're getting into, and that's a good place to be. Secondly, you want to buy players/cards that you have a finite view on what is produced. So for most of the, say, Messi, Ronaldo type players and players of their era and before, you know mostly what the cards that are made of that player are for their entire playing career. Now, me personally, I would add this as well. I very much prefer playing year cards as opposed to post-playing days cards, because post-playing days cards get you in this whole sort of whirlwind, and you're going to be at the whim of Panini and Topps for decades to come, right? Some examples of that lately have been like Zidane post-playing days autos, Ronaldo R9 post-playing days autos, and post-playing days cards and Prism Golds and stuff like that. And they're fun cards, if you want to have a little fun, hey, I think they're fun cards. But at the same time, if we're talking about what's going to perform well in the long term, I do struggle with that type of stuff because, again, who's to say that those cards aren't produced year after year after year after year and constantly have to compete with the new production? It's just a bit tricky. So again, a way to cut that out and to cut that noise out is to just go after playing days cards and to go after playing days cards of players where you basically know what they're going to have. A great instance of this recently is the Topps Dynasty product that came out. For many players, those could be some of the best cards that they've ever had made. And if you were buying those players' cards a few years earlier, you would have never known that there was going to be a card that comes out and totally supplants you as maybe their best card out there. So it is something to note. Along with that, I would say buy players/cards people don't want to sell, right? I mean, on the opposite end of this, we talked about how rookies people are always wanting to sell because the point of, buying a rookie early is probably to sell and make some money whenever they do something good. Alternatively, there are players and cards in particular out there that people don't want to sell, and you're basically going to have to pry out of people's hands or, be really patient and find one at auction. And that's sort of where you want to be because, one, there's a lot less people obviously going out there to sell, so there's a lot more incentive for the card to go up in price as people have to sort of reach or just make it more known financially that they want that card. They're going to have to push a little higher than maybe they would have liked to. But also along with that, typically the cards that people don't want to sell, those are the types of cards that really truly matter to some degree or another. And a lot of the people that own them probably have put in the work, have put in the time, have put in the effort to be able to go out, find them, and source them and say, these are the cards I want. And that's important because not only do you have your own conclusions on why that card might matter or might go up in the future, but you also have the support of others within the space, right? I do think it's important to look around and see who else owns that type of card other than you, because oftentimes if you can get an idea for what that person is doing in the hobby, you can get an idea for what the people that own that card are doing and why they own it and what their purpose is. And then finally, spend time understanding what cards are the most important to that player. Now, this isn't a foolproof sort of way of, I guess, quote unquote, investing, because some of the most important cards are priced extremely high. Some of the most important cards are already sort of determined to be the most important cards, right? Just because I realize that a 2022 1/1 Prism Messi is an important card doesn't mean I can go out and buy it because it might be a couple $100,000. So it's all a sliding scale. It's all relative, right? Go out and see what are some of the best cards for this player that are out there. What are some of the most rare? What are some of the most scarce? And how much are they worth? And figure out what makes sense to you in that certain category, right? And again, in soccer, I think that this is a very doable task. I think that it's, fairly affordable, again, compared to a lot of American sports. So I think that it is doable in that regard. And so for me, these are some of the most important factors that I would go ahead and throw out there. I will add a few more. And that is finally that there is no shortcut. There is no, this is the best investment, go buy this, you're going to do the best. Because one, again, if I told those cards to people, it would sort of be self-sabotaging in the way that people would go and buy them purely with the intent to sell them, which means that they're not going to be the best investment. So you can't do that. Instead, I would highly recommend researching and spending time in the space because this will best serve you over your entirety in soccer cards, right? You have to be your own sort of guide in this. One, because you're going to perform the best that way, but two, because you don't want to be blaming other people for cards that you might have bought high and sold low and this, that, and the other. It's definitely a lot better to be able to research yourself and to only blame yourself if you do fail in this endeavor. And you can learn from that, get better, come back stronger, and maybe buy some better cards. I mean, there's a lot of time to be able to buy soccer cards if you truly enjoy this type of stuff. Take it slow, take it easy, and have a good time with it. Next, I would say this should be something you genuinely enjoy, right? If you're, looking at soccer cards and saying, what do I invest in? If you don't care about the space, go buy something else. I mean, there's tons of things in this world that you can put your money into and might perform pretty well, right? So you don't need to buy soccer cards for one reason or another if you don't genuinely enjoy this, right? And I would imagine most of you do if you clicked on this video, but just something to throw out there because I think it's important, right? And I think that if you want to be the best collector, the best investor, the best whatever you're trying to do in soccer, the best flipper, whatever it is, you have to genuinely enjoy the space because if you don't, it's going to hinder you in so many regards. Then I think along the same lines, a collector mindset will win the day. Again, if you're just looking to invest, I think you're missing out on a lot of the key points that actually make soccer cards go up over time. I think you're going to miss out on a lot of the reasons that people are willing to pay up time and time again for certain cards out there. So I think a collector mindset is certainly the best way to go about it. You don't have to purely be a collector, but you do have to understand what motivates a collector, what motivates the people that actually want to own these cards. And then finally, I can't promise you'll find the best ROI, but if you do this, you will find great cards along the way, and you should have a good amount of fun as well, which ultimately, I think that's the point of the space. I don't think that, stonks and best ROI is necessarily why people come here, and I don't think it's going to make you stay. But hopefully you find cool cards, hopefully you have a good time, and hopefully you enjoy the video. With that said, that's going to be it for me. Hopefully you enjoyed. Again, if you did, make sure to leave a like. Would love to hear any thoughts down below. Good, bad, negative, whatever. I just said bad twice, but nonetheless, if you got a good comment, leave that as well. But love to hear your thoughts. And if you want to see more videos like this as soon as I go live, make sure to subscribe. But with that said, hopefully you have a wonderful day, and peace.